The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Training Compound in Coronado, California. Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear one final time, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes tracking her every movement. She had arrived at the elite training facility 3 weeks ago, officially designated as a physical fitness instructor for the base. What nobody knew was that she carried credentials that would make even the toughest operators pause with respect. At 28 years old, Sarah possessed an athletic resume that read like fiction. She had competed in 3 Olympic trials for swimming, held multiple state records in powerlifting, and had spent 4 years as a competitive CrossFit athlete before transitioning into military contracting work. Her lean frame and quiet demeanor often led people to underestimate her capabilities, something she had learned to use to her advantage throughout her career. The SEALs had been running their monthly physical fitness assessment when she first observed them from across the training yard. Team Alpha was considered one of the most elite units in the command, comprised of operators who had seen action across multiple combat theaters. Their leader, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Torres, was a legend in the community. Standing 6 feet 4 inches with arms like tree trunks, he had earned his reputation through 15 years of flawless service and an uncanny ability to push human performance beyond normal limits. Sarah watched as the team prepared for their signature challenge, a grueling circuit that combined elements of their Hell Week training with modern functional fitness protocols. The course included a half-mile ocean swim in full gear, followed by a 2-mile beach run carrying a 60-pound rucksack, then a series of obstacle courses that tested everything from grip strength to mental fortitude. The final challenge was a rope climb sequence that required operators to ascend a 40-foot rope 5 times consecutively, with only 30 seconds of rest between attempts. The current base record stood at 43 minutes and 18 seconds, set by Torres himself during a particularly intense training session 6 months prior. Since then, dozens of operators had attempted to break his mark, but none had come within 2 minutes of his time. The challenge had become something of a legend around the base, with newcomers often trying their luck only to discover the humbling reality of elite-level fitness. Torres noticed Sarah observing their preparation and walked over with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. His team followed behind, their expressions ranging from curious to mildly amused. These men were used to attention from base personnel, but something about Sarah's focused observation suggested she was analyzing rather than simply watching. "Morning, ma'am," Torres said, his voice carrying the gravelly tone of someone who had spent years shouting orders over gunfire and helicopter rotors. "You're the new PT instructor, right, Sarah Martinez?" She nodded, extending her hand for a firm handshake. "That's correct, Chief. I've been reviewing the training protocols here. Impressive setup you have." One of the younger SEALs, Petty Officer Jake Sullivan, stepped forward with a grin that suggested he enjoyed being the team's unofficial spokesman. "Chief Torres here holds the base record on our signature course. 43:18. Been standing for 6 months now." Sarah's eyes moved from Sullivan back to Torres, then swept across the elaborate training setup. She took in every detail. The churning Pacific waters where the swim portion would take place, the soft sand that would make the weighted run exponentially more difficult, and the intimidating rope climb station that had broken the spirits of countless ambitious trainees. 43:18. She repeated thoughtfully, as if running calculations in her head. "That's definitely a solid time." The slight pause in her response caught Torres's attention. In his experience, most people either offered immediate praise for such an achievement or asked questions about the specific challenges involved. Sarah's measured response suggested she was evaluating the performance from a technical standpoint rather than simply acknowledging it. Petty Officer Rodriguez, the team's communications specialist, chuckled and nudged Sullivan with his elbow. "Sounds like our new PT instructor knows her stuff. You think you could handle our little course, ma'am?" The question hung in the air with the kind of tension that develops when professional athletes size each other up. Torres shot Rodriguez a warning look. Not because the question was inappropriate, but because he recognized the subtle shift in Sarah's posture that suggested the conversation had just moved beyond casual observation. Sarah looked at each team member individually, her expression remaining neutral, but her eyes showing the unmistakable spark of competitive interest. I haven't seen the complete course layout yet, but it looks well designed. Good combination of cardiovascular endurance, functional strength, and mental toughness. That's not really an answer, Sullivan pressed, his grin widening. Rodriguez asked if you could handle it. Torres found himself genuinely curious about Sarah's response. In his 15 years of service, he had learned to read people quickly and accurately. Sarah carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced significant physical and mental challenges, but the course they had designed was specifically intended to push elite special operations personnel to their absolute limits. Sarah glanced toward the training area once more, her analytical gaze taking in details that most observers would miss. She noted the specific angle of the rope climb, the distance between obstacle stations, and the way the morning sun would affect visibility during the swimming portion. After a moment that felt longer than it actually was, she looked back at the assembled team. "Mind if I try?" she asked simply. The question landed like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples of surprised looks among the SEALs. Sullivan's grin faltered slightly. Rodriguez raised his eyebrows, and even Torres found himself momentarily speechless. It wasn't that women hadn't attempted challenging courses at the base before, but something about Sarah's quiet confidence suggested this wasn't going to be a token effort or a publicity stunt. Torres recovered his composure first, his expression shifting into the professional mask he wore when evaluating potential candidates. "Ma'am, with respect, this course is designed specifically for operators who have completed SEAL training. The physical demands are significant." Sarah finished his sentence. "I understand. I'm not asking for any accommodations or modifications. Same course, same standards, same timing system you use for your evaluations." The morning breeze carried the sound of other training activities from across the compound, but the immediate area had grown quiet as word of the conversation spread among nearby personnel. Several other operators had stopped their own preparations to listen, creating an audience that Sarah seemed completely unaware of or unbothered by. Petty Officer Martinez, the team's medic, stepped forward with genuine concern evident in his voice. "Ma'am, the insurance implications alone." Sarah reached into her gear bag and produced a folder of documents that she handed to Torres. "My medical clearance, liability waivers, and fitness certifications. Everything should be in order for any physical training activities on base." Torres opened the folder and began reading, his expression changing as he processed the information. The other team members waited in tense silence, trying to read their chief's reaction. After several minutes, he looked up at Sarah with newfound respect and what might have been the beginning of concern. "Olympic trials qualifier," he said quietly, more to himself than to the group. "Military contractor fitness certifications." He closed the folder and handed it back to her. "These are impressive credentials, but they don't necessarily translate to our specific challenges." Sarah nodded in acknowledgement. "I understand completely. That's why I'd like to try the course. Best way to understand any training protocol is to experience it directly." The challenge was officially issued and accepted, though neither party had explicitly stated it in those terms. Torres found himself in the unusual position of potentially watching a civilian attempt to break a record that his own elite operators had failed to match for 6 months. The professional part of his mind told him this was likely to result in either injury or embarrassment, possibly both. But another part of him, the part that had always been drawn to exceptional people doing exceptional things, was genuinely curious to see what would happen. "When?" Torres asked, his tone shifting into the practical planning mode that had served him well throughout his career. "Now works for me," Sarah replied, already beginning to adjust her gear. "Unless you have other training scheduled." Sullivan looked at Rodriguez, then back at Sarah. "You want to attempt our record right now? No warm-up period, no chance to study the course, no practice runs?" "I've been watching for 20 minutes, Sarah said, pulling on a pair of well-worn training gloves. "Sometimes overthinking makes things more complicated than they need to be." Torres made a decision that would be discussed in the base's informal networks for months afterward. "All right, Miss Martinez. You'll follow the exact same protocol we use for official attempts. Timer starts when you enter the water, stops when you complete the final rope climb. Medical personnel will be standing by, and you can call off the attempt at any point with no questions asked. As word spread that a civilian PT instructor was about to attempt the SEAL team's signature course record, personnel began gathering at observation points around the training area. Sarah seemed oblivious to the growing audience, focused entirely on her pre-exercise routine of dynamic stretching and mental preparation. Chief Torres activated his stopwatch and took his position at the timing station. His team spread out along the course to serve as spotters and safety observers, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly curious. The morning that had started as a routine training session was about to become something entirely different. Sarah approached the water's edge, where the 60-pound rucksack waited alongside the other required gear. She shouldered the pack with smooth efficiency, adjusted the straps with the practiced motions of someone accustomed to heavy loads, and waded into the Pacific without hesitation. "Timer starts on my mark," Torres called out, his voice carrying across the water. Sarah dove forward into the churning surf, and the most talked-about 43 minutes in the base's recent history officially began. The first indication that something unusual was happening came during the swimming portion of the challenge. Most operators, even highly trained ones, showed visible signs of strain within the first few hundred yards when carrying full gear through ocean surf. The 60-pound rucksack created significant drag, the saltwater gear added extra weight, and the unpredictable Pacific currents demanded constant course corrections that drained energy reserves quickly. Sarah moved through the water with a fluidity that caught Torres off guard. Her stroke technique showed clear evidence of competitive training, but more importantly, she seemed to understand intuitively how to work with the ocean's natural rhythms rather than fighting against them. Where other challengers typically employed a brute force approach, Sarah used timing and positioning to maximize efficiency and minimize energy expenditure. "She's actually gaining time on the swim," Rodriguez observed, checking his watch against the split times they had recorded for Torres's record-setting run. "How is that possible with the gear?" 1. Petty Officer Sullivan had positioned himself at the halfway point of the swimming course and was tracking Sarah's progress through binoculars. "Her form is textbook perfect. She's not fighting the current at all, just using it to maintain her line." Torres watched in silence, his analytical mind processing what he was observing. The swimming portion typically took most challengers between 12 and 14 minutes to complete. His own record time for this segment was 11 minutes and 47 seconds, achieved on a day when ocean conditions had been nearly perfect. Sarah was on pace to match or exceed that time despite facing slightly rougher seas. As she approached the beach exit point, Sarah's movements remained smooth and controlled. Most challengers stumbled or showed signs of fatigue when transitioning from water to land while carrying the heavy pack. But Sarah maintained her form through the transition. She emerged from the surf, water streaming from her gear, and immediately began the beach run portion without the usual recovery pause that most operators needed. The 2-mile beach run with a 60-pound rucksack was designed to test cardiovascular endurance, while muscle groups were already fatigued from swimming. The soft sand created additional resistance that turned every step into a significant effort, and the California sun had begun to heat up the beach surface considerably. Sarah settled into a rhythm that suggested she understood the importance of pacing for long-duration efforts. Her breathing appeared controlled, her stride length remained consistent, and she maintained proper posture despite the significant weight on her shoulders. Torres found himself checking his watch more frequently, comparing her progress to his own recorded split times. "She's not slowing down," Martinez observed as Sarah passed the 1-mile marker. "Most people are struggling pretty significantly by this point." The gathered observers had grown larger as word spread throughout the base. Off-duty personnel, other training units, and even some base administrative staff had found reasons to be in the area. The novelty of watching a civilian attempt to break an elite SEAL team's record had generated significant interest, but the quality of Sarah's performance was beginning to shift the mood from casual curiosity to genuine amazement. At the 1.5-mile point, Sarah actually increased her pace slightly. This was the portion of the course where Torres's own record attempt had nearly failed, where the accumulated fatigue from swimming and running typically forced even elite athletes to dig deep into their mental reserves. Sarah not only maintained her form, but appeared to be getting stronger as the challenge progressed. Negative split, Torres said quietly, more to himself than to his team. She's running the second half faster than the first half. Sullivan lowered his binoculars and looked at his chief with an expression of disbelief. That's not supposed to be possible with this course design. As Sarah approached the end of the beach run, her transition into the obstacle course portion demonstrated the same smooth efficiency she had shown throughout the challenge. The obstacles were designed to test functional strength, agility, and mental toughness, while physical resources were already significantly depleted. The first obstacle was a series of tire runs followed by rope traverses that required upper body strength and coordination. Sarah moved through these elements with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent significant time training similar movements. Her technique was flawless. But more importantly, she seemed to understand how to minimize energy expenditure while maintaining speed. Torres found himself mentally recalculating the mathematical possibilities. If Sarah maintained her current pace through the obstacle course, she would reach the rope climb portion with a significant time advantage over his record. The rope climbs, however, were where most exceptional attempts came to an end. 5 consecutive 40-foot climbs, with only 30 seconds of rest between attempts, had broken the spirits and bodies of countless strong candidates. The obstacle course portion continued with wall climbs, cargo net traverses, and a particularly challenging sequence that required competitors to carry weighted objects through a complex maze while navigating various physical barriers. Sarah approached each element methodically, never rushing but never wasting motion or energy. "Look at her hands," Rodriguez pointed out during one of the rope traverse obstacles. "No shaking, no visible fatigue signs. How is that possible after swimming and running with full gear?" Torres was beginning to understand that they were witnessing something genuinely exceptional. Sarah's performance wasn't just good for a civilian or impressive for someone attempting the course for the first time. She was demonstrating the kind of athletic ability and mental fortitude that belonged in conversations about elite special operations personnel. As Sarah completed the final obstacle and approached the rope climb station, the entire base seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment where exceptional attempts typically ended, where physical exhaustion finally overcame determination and technique. The 40-foot rope hung in the still morning air, like a challenge that had defeated dozens of strong candidates. Sarah looked up at the rope, then checked the timer display that showed her current elapsed time. For the first time, during the entire attempt, she paused for more than a few seconds. Torres wondered if she was finally beginning to feel the accumulated effects of the challenge, if this was where reality would reassert itself and bring the remarkable performance back to earth. Instead, Sarah removed her gloves and flexed her fingers briefly, a simple gesture that suggested she was preparing for the technical demands of rope climbing rather than struggling with fatigue. She grasped the rope with a grip that showed clear evidence of serious climbing experience and began her first ascent with smooth, powerful movements. The first climb was completed in 48 seconds, well within the range of elite performance. Sarah descended with controlled speed, using proper technique to minimize the impact on her grip strength and forearms. The 30-second rest period began, during which most challengers focused on breathing and preparing mentally for the next climb. Sarah spent the rest period in what appeared to be active recovery, keeping her muscles loose and her breathing controlled. When time was called for the second climb, she attacked the rope with the same intensity and technique as the first attempt. 46 seconds, Sullivan called out as Sarah reached the top of her second climb. "She's actually getting faster." Torres felt a familiar tightness in his chest that he recognized from moments when he had witnessed truly exceptional human performance. Sarah wasn't just attempting to complete the course. She was demonstrating a level of physical and mental capability that challenged his understanding of what was possible for someone who hadn't gone through SEAL training. The third climb was completed in 45 seconds, followed by a fourth in 47 seconds. As Sarah began her final ascent, the assembled crowd of observers had grown completely silent. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something that would be discussed and remembered for years to come. Sarah's final climb was her strongest, completed in 43 seconds, Despite representing her fifth consecutive ascent of the challenging rope, she reached the top, rang the bell that signified course completion, and began her descent with the same controlled precision she had demonstrated throughout the entire challenge. Torres looked at his stopwatch as Sarah's feet touched the ground, ending the official timing sequence. He stared at the display for several seconds, as if the numbers might change if he looked at them long enough. Around him, his team waited in tense silence for the announcement that would either confirm or deny what they had all begun to suspect. 39 minutes and 52 seconds, Torres announced, his voice carrying clearly across the training area, despite being barely above normal speaking volume. The silence that followed lasted for several heartbeats, as if the assembled observers needed time to process the significance of what had just been announced. Sarah had not only broken Torres's long-standing record, she had shattered it by more than 3.5 minutes, a margin that represented a fundamental difference in capability rather than a minor improvement in performance. Sarah stood quietly near the rope climb station, her breathing elevated but controlled, showing signs of exertion, but appearing far from exhausted. She had just completed one of the most demanding physical challenges on a base full of elite military personnel, and she looked as if she could potentially repeat the performance if asked. The aftermath of Sarah's record-breaking performance created a ripple effect throughout the naval special warfare community that extended far beyond the Coronado training facility. Within hours, news of the civilian PT instructor, who had demolished an elite SEAL team's signature course record, was spreading through unofficial channels across multiple military installations. Torres found himself in the unusual position of having to verify and document a performance that challenged many assumptions about physical capability and military training protocols. The official timing systems, multiple witnesses, and video documentation from standard training cameras left no doubt about the legitimacy of Sarah's achievement, but the implications were more complex than simply updating a record board. "Chief, we've got calls coming in from 3 different commands asking for confirmation," Rodriguez reported as the immediate crowd of observers began to disperse. Sarah had moved to a quiet area near the equipment shed, where she was methodically cleaning and organizing her gear with the same precise attention to detail she had demonstrated throughout the challenge. Her demeanor remained calm and professional, showing no signs of the triumph or excitement that might be expected from someone who had just achieved something genuinely remarkable. Torres approached her with genuine curiosity about how someone develops the kind of capability he had just witnessed. In his 15 years of service, he had worked alongside some of the most physically gifted and mentally tough individuals in the military, but Sarah's performance represented something beyond normal elite athlete standards. "Miss Martinez," he said, settling into a nearby chair with the careful movements of someone whose body had absorbed significant punishment over many years of demanding service. "That was an exceptional performance. I'm curious about your training background." Sarah looked up from organizing her equipment, her expression remaining professional but showing a hint of appreciation for the question. "Thank you, Chief. It's been a gradual process over many years. Started with competitive swimming in college, then transitioned into more functional fitness approaches after graduation. The rope climbing technique you demonstrated suggests specific training," Torres observed. "That's not something most athletes pick up casually." "Rock climbing was a hobby for several years," Sarah explained. "Indoor climbing gyms, outdoor sport climbing, some traditional climbing, in various locations. The rope climbing transfers pretty directly, just different equipment and environment." Sullivan had been listening to the conversation while reviewing the official timing documentation that would need to be submitted to base records. "Miss Martinez, can I ask what made you decide to attempt our course? Most people would observe for weeks or months before considering something like that." Sarah's response revealed the analytical mindset that had driven her performance. "I've been studying military fitness protocols for the past several years as part of my contracting work. Your course design is excellent, but it's fundamentally an endurance challenge with technical elements rather than a pure strength test. My training background happens to align well with those demands." The technical way Sarah discussed the course design caught Torres's attention. Most people focused on the obvious physical demands or the intimidating reputation of SEAL training. But Sarah had analyzed the challenge from an exercise science perspective and developed a strategy accordingly. "You had a plan going in," Torres said. It wasn't a question. Swimming is about efficiency and technique when you're carrying extra weight, Sarah explained. The key is maintaining stroke mechanics and using the current rather than fighting it. Beach running requires pace management because the soft sand multiplies the energy cost of each step. The obstacles are basically functional strength movements that I train regularly. Rope climbing is technique dependent once you understand the basic mechanics. Rodriguez shook his head in amazement. You just broke down our signature course like it was a textbook exercise. Every physical challenge follows predictable biomechanical principles, Sarah replied. Understanding those principles allows you to develop appropriate strategies and training approaches. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Commander Patricia Hayes, the base fitness director, who had received multiple reports about the morning's events and wanted to understand the situation directly. Hayes was a former Navy diver herself and had spent decades working with elite military personnel, giving her the experience to recognize genuinely exceptional performance when she encountered it. Chief Torres, Commander Hayes said, I understand we had some unusual training activity this morning. Can you brief me on what happened? Torres provided a concise but comprehensive summary of Sarah's challenge attempt and the resulting record-breaking performance. Commander Hayes listened without interruption, occasionally glancing at Sarah with the evaluative look of someone trying to understand how an individual develops extraordinary capability. Miss Martinez, Hayes said after Torres completed his briefing, your performance this morning has generated significant interest. I've received calls from personnel who want to understand your training methods and background. Sarah's response demonstrated the same measured professionalism she had shown throughout the morning. I'm happy to share information about training approaches, Commander. Most of what I do follows established exercise science principles, just applied consistently over time. Commander Hayes reviewed the official documentation that Torres handed her, comparing the recorded times against the base's historical performance records. After several minutes, she looked up with an expression that combined professional respect with genuine curiosity. Miss Martinez, I'd like to discuss the possibility of you conducting some training sessions for our personnel. Your approach to course analysis and performance strategy could benefit our operators. The offer represented recognition that Sarah's achievement wasn't just an individual accomplishment, but potentially valuable knowledge that could improve the capabilities of elite military personnel. Sarah considered the proposal for a moment before responding. I'd be honored to contribute to training programs here, Commander. I think there's significant value in sharing different perspectives on physical preparation and performance optimization. Over the following weeks, Sarah's training sessions became some of the most popular educational opportunities available on the base. Her approach combined rigorous exercise science with practical techniques developed through years of competitive athletics, creating programs that enhanced the already impressive capabilities of SEAL team members. The rope climbing technique she demonstrated was integrated into standard training protocols after she conducted detailed instruction sessions that broke down the mechanics of efficient climbing. Her swimming efficiency methods were adopted by multiple units, resulting in measurable improvements in water-based training times across the base. Perhaps more importantly, Sarah's analytical approach to physical challenges influenced how operators thought about training and performance optimization. Rather than relying solely on traditional methods, personnel began incorporating exercise science principles and strategic thinking into their preparation routines. Torres found that his own training benefited significantly from Sarah's insights. The techniques she shared allowed him to maintain his competitive performance levels while reducing the physical stress and recovery time associated with intense training sessions. She changed how we think about preparation. Torres reflected months later during a conversation with visiting personnel from other commands. Most of us focused on pushing harder or training longer. Sarah showed us how to train smarter and more efficiently. Sarah's record stood unchallenged for more than 2 years, despite numerous attempts by visiting operators and base personnel who wanted to test themselves against the new standard. The performance had established a benchmark that required not just exceptional physical capability but also strategic thinking and technical precision. The broader impact of Sarah's achievement extended beyond the Coronado facility. Other military installations began incorporating her training methods into their programs, and exercise science researchers used her performance as a case study in the application of analytical approaches to physical challenges. Sarah continued her work as a military contractor and fitness specialist, traveling between installations and working with various special operations units. Her reputation as someone who could bridge the gap between academic exercise science and practical military application made her a sought-after consultant for training program development. Years later, when new personnel arrived at Coronado and saw Sarah's time posted on the record board, they often assumed it belonged to a visiting special operations athlete or an Olympic-level competitor. The discovery that the record belonged to a civilian PT instructor who had casually asked, "Mind if I try?" became part of the base's unofficial folklore. The story served as a reminder that exceptional capability could emerge from unexpected sources, and that assumptions about physical limits often said more about traditional thinking than actual human potential. Sarah's 43-minute conversation with the Pacific Ocean, soft sand, and climbing rope had demonstrated that sometimes the most remarkable achievements came from individuals who simply approached challenges with the right combination of knowledge, preparation, and quiet confidence. For Torres and his team, the experience reinforced the importance of remaining open to learning from anyone who demonstrated genuine expertise, regardless of their background or credentials. Sarah had shown them that mastery could take many forms, and that the most valuable lessons often came from people who approached familiar challenges with fresh perspectives and proven methods. The morning that began with routine training had become a lesson in humility, excellence, and the importance of never underestimating the capabilities of individuals who had dedicated themselves to understanding and optimizing human performance.